Hi everyone, and welcome back to the studio. So in this video, this is going to be my first kind of process video where I'm following another pattern to create something. And this is going to be part of an overarching, very bare bones series where I'm just trying out patterns that I've been wanting to try, kind of as some encouragement to getting around to some of the patterns that I have. And then at the end of the video, I'll talk about it a little bit, show off the finished product, talk about the pattern, maybe say what I would do differently if I would use a different yarn or do something else different. And at the end of the video as well, I will also say if I would recommend the pattern gone through over the course of the video. So in this video, I'm going to be doing the Scrappi cardigan from Pretty and Pate. I'm not quite sure how to say that, but I usually say Pate in my head. And this is the oversized granny square cardigan, and this is by Pate. I'm going to try to tag her down below in the description. If you're watching this, hi. This pattern is for all like the scrap yarn that you have. However, because of the fall season, I am recording this in September, or I'm starting this in September, and because of the fall season, I wanted a more like autumny, fall-y cardigan with one yarn type, and I will specifically be using the mandala cake yarn in the color Centaur. I liked another color, I think that was called Cyclops, but I couldn't find enough yarn within that color lot for mandala from Joann's, so I went with this one, which I really like too, and we're just gonna go from here. Okay, so I wanted to explain what the tester phase is and my personal process through it. I forgot to record for this part, but I did still want to explain it like I said. Now, when I'm talking about a tester phase, I'm not talking about testers for patterns that have yet to be released. What I mean by a testing phase, the testing phase, is when you are working through a pattern that you have bought or found for free, you're basically like testing it out within the initial stages. When you're testing out a pattern that you've either bought from Etsy or Ravelry, it's up on the screen, or if you found it for free on like Instagram or Facebook or a blog, when you're testing it out, you are seeing what yarn works best, seeing the tension that works best, and the hook size that works best based on the pattern and the gauge offered. And you're also seeing how to best access the pattern for yourself, whether it's printing out the pattern, accessing it on an iPad or a computer or your phone, and also accessing it as a file or a web page or a post on social media or in photos, or if it's a written out pattern or a video. So you're basically testing out the pattern before you really start committing to it. And also a big part of the testing phase is reading through the pattern at least once before you start, just to make sure you're not missing anything, and just to make sure you don't miss anything or that you're not caught by surprise by a later step. Now, the testing phase for me with this Scrappi Oversized Granny Square cardigan, the testing phase was definitely a lot of like back and forth with making and remaking a granny square, because my tension is a little bit tight. It's not super tight, but it is a little bit tighter than what Priscilla Pate, I watched her video on the cardigan, making the cardigan. My tension is a bit tighter than what hers is, and the recommended hook size for the yarn that I'm using is like, the recommended hook size is a 5mm hook, which is the US H8 hook, so 5mm, but in the pattern she used a yarn type that was more suitable for a 6mm hook. A lot of it was testing out what hook size would work best best based on the cage. The size of the granny squares are about 6.5 inches. The big ones are about 6.5 inches. The small ones are about 5 to 5.5 inches. I have not gotten to the small granny squares yet. For the mandala yarn that I got for this pattern, I ended up sizing up to this hook. It is an 8mm hook. I always say millimeter, is that correct? I just size up to this one, and my granny squares are just the teensiest bit shy of 6.5 inches, maybe like an eighth of an inch shy at the most of 6.5 inches, so it's about like 6 3/8 inches. I could have gone up one more size to a 9mm 9mm hook, but I didn't want, just for my personal preference, I didn't want it to be too big, so that's why I personally just stayed with the 8mm hook. And then for me as well, there was a lot of practice with the stitches, just because I am familiar with the stitches, but just practicing them with that hook size, because sometimes it is a little bit awkward to crochet with a hook that is at least 3mm sizes bigger than what the yarn recommends. Usually when I'm crocheting any other project, I use the hook size recommended on the paper, and if I decide to change the hook size, I will usually only go about 0.5mm bigger or smaller, and at the most I'll go a full size bigger or smaller, and I usually do not go more than that. So going like 3 sizes up was a little bit of a learning curve, but I got the hang of it pretty quickly, and it's been pretty nice doing this granny square project. For me, at least, with this pattern, going back and forth between the video pattern and the written out pattern has really helped a lot. I do have the written pattern printed out as well as on my iPad, so I've been kind of like toggling between the printed out pattern and the one on my iPad and the video as needed. And then once I'm at a point where I'm ready to start sewing the granny squares together, that's when I will kind of be toggling a little bit more between the video and the written out pattern. I haven't been using the video as much now that I kind of understand a little bit more. I was using the video as a visual for how to do the stitches, just like as a reminder. Now I'm just focusing on finishing up the number of granny squares, and like I said, I will return a little bit more heavily to the videos provided when I'm ready to start weaving together the granny squares and doing the trim. But moving on to talk about a little bit more about the pattern and then maybe record a little bit more crocheting clips, I have been working through one of the bigger cakes of yarn that I balled up. And then once this one is done, I'll be moving on to the other big ball. And then once I finish up this one, it's when I'll move on to the smaller one. One thing I will say about this yarn, it's not really a big surprise, and it's not really like a disappointment either. I was just expecting something a little different. When I turn to variegated yarn, I usually use Caron cakes, which are more heavily variegated and the colors are more interspersed throughout the yarn, so you get more of a variation in color. Even if it's the same color, like you get more of a variation in shades or colors within the yarn and within a single granny square if you're working on granny squares. But with the mandala yarn, again, not a surprise, not a disappointment really, but just a little unexpected. The colors are more blocked out and it is variegated, but the colors are a little bit more spaced out, blocked out, like I said. So to show, you can see like the variation color, but you can see it's also blocked out. So there is this like goldish brownish color. It's kind of like a gold brown, and then you transition to this grayish brown, and then you do see the variation from the goldish brown to the grayish brown there, and then you have that, and then here you see the variation between this grayish brown to the reddish brown, and it is a nice transition, but again, it's kind of more blocked out. With this yarn ball, you can see I'm going to be finishing up like the reddish brown color and then going to more, and this is more of a brownish red, and then it'll transition to more of a reddish brown. So that was like, it caught me off guard a little bit at first, but then it, again, like I said, it's not a big deal. There's a part of me that would have preferred to use a more heavily variegated yarn that was a little bit more interspersed throughout, like the Caron cakes. But again, I am liking how this is turning out, and this will be a fun fall cardigan. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I get it done within September. I am recording this in September, and like I said, hopefully I get it done this month so that I can wear it in October and November. I'll try to bring you along for more of the ride with me.
It's very much so a book about like following your dreams and doing everything you expect it to be like woke or with the times, but it does not really like weave in privilege and how that comes into play in fighting for your dream, which I am dreading. But I haven't been since I got sick, which was like a week and a half ago, so it's been, but I feel like I've had lots of obstacles lately that have kept me from like going to the gym. Leaving this book feeling is that the character work was done really well. It's not a book where necessarily the characters are growing in these situations. The store sells a different kind of dream, and I believe if I remember correctly, you pay for the dreams with those reactions. Anyway, we are alongside Penny as we were discovering all the ins and outs of Gallagher Dream Department Store. She doesn't know anything, and so we're learning alongside her. Without further ado, been a little bit consistent now, so I'm excited about that. Hoping to maintain that consistency. Anyway,
Okay, so this is how it's looking so far. I have 11 squares in total. I might change it up a little bit. I'm doing the tall glass of wine, which means I need 4 rows of 5, 20 granny squares in total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So once I have all 4 rows, then I'll kind of decide how I want it. But it's either going to be like this, where I kind of just have the color gradient going like this, zigzaggy type, or I might have it like the columns, because it is 4 squares per color roughly. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so as I said, I have 11 squares here in total. I'm currently working on this ball. I will most likely need to move to this one because I need 36 squares in total. It's 20 for the back and then 16 for the front. So depending on how the front squares look with using this one, or just in general, depending on how the front squares look, I might change it up a little bit more, and we're just gonna go from there. Oh, that would be so cool for like a... That's the thing, you can barely see it from over there. Am I a little bit bored right now? Yes. Yeah, that's not gonna work. The thing is that if I change that light to the orangey one, then it's a little bit too dark. But if the lamp I have over there, this side, is orange, it's too far away. It's not like orangey enough. So I know I'm keeping like the look of it a little bit vague, and that's just because I'm not entirely sure how I want it to look right now. I do have a little bit more of a definitive look planned out. I have all of the squares for the main body of the cardigan done, and those are stacked into piles so that I know which squares go where. And then I am a little bit over halfway done with the granny squares for the sleeves. 1, 2, 3. So I have 12 here. I'm working on the 13th one, which means including the one I'm working on, I need about 7 more. Not about, I need 7 more. And then once I have all of the granny squares done and then I'm weaving them all together, I will record some of the weaving together of the granny squares. I won't record all of it, but I will record some of it. I'm not 100% set on the way I have it set up right now, which is again why I'm keeping it a little bit vague, because I don't want to commit to something just yet. And I want to be able to finish the sleeves and kind of see how the sleeves will work out and then go from there. So that is the crochet update for the Scrappi cardigan. Also, I don't know if I've mentioned this in this video yet, but if I have, I'll just repeat it. As with all of my videos so far, I do not have the ability to do links in the description. Once I am able to do that, that's when I will link both Pretty and Pate's Etsy shop and then the Scrappi cardigan and her Instagram as well, so that you can go to that. And as with previous videos, I will have the description set up to just easily input the links, but as usual, the links will be added once I have the ability to do so. So this is the end result, and overall I am really happy with it, especially considering that this was my first time making this. So just to show you what it looks like on me, this is the sleeve. These are the cuffs. These were maker error and not necessarily pattern error. I used the wrong yarn weight for the cuffs. When making the cuffs, I was just a little bit nervous that I wouldn't have enough to do the cuffs and trim in the yarn that I used for the squares. But like I said, this was more so maker error rather than pattern error. For me, lengthwise, like shoulder to hips, the tall glass of wine one works well. It's just with the width, like shoulder to shoulder, that's where it kind of gets too long, and that's why I think the sleeves ended up being too long. For me personally, when I do this again for myself and probably for my sister and like family members as well, I will probably only make it 3 wide in the back and then 1 and 1 in the front, just because, as I said, this one was part of this front panel, this one was part of this front panel, and that's where it ended up being too long for me, the sleeves. I'm kind of like average height. I'm not super short. I'm like 5'5", but I don't have very long arms. My arms are not that long, and my index finger, it's about 3/4 of the way in the granny square, so it's just too long for me. I'm gonna decide what I'm gonna do with this, just because there's a part of me that is really proud of this, but at the same time there's also a part of me that, because of all these little things that didn't go right for me, again, maker error, not pattern error, because it didn't necessarily go right because of decisions I made while making it. On the one hand, I am proud of it, but at the same time, it's like, it's kind of hard for me to see past that. If you've made this before, let me know your tips and tricks, any modifications you've had to make, what colors you used, what yarns you used, because I would love to make more of these. I would love to make more of these to sell and for personal use. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.